The champagne glass trembled between my fingers, reflecting fractured golden light across my borrowed dress. The charity gala hummed around me with conversations I wasn't meant to hear, perfumes I couldn't afford to wear, and people who looked through me rather than at me. The banquet hall of the Asterian Hotel gleamed with crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen rain above marble floors, polished to mirror shine. I didn't belong here. "Another drink, miss?" A server materialized beside me, his white-gloved hand extending a silver tray. "No, thank you." My voice sounded small even to my own ears. I was only here because Mrs. Whitmore, my elderly neighbor who had become something of a surrogate grandmother, had fallen ill and insisted I take her place. "The charity needs young faces," she'd said, pressing the invitation into my palm. "And you need a night away from that dreadful diner." I smoothed down the midnight blue gown Mrs. Whitmore had lent me, a relic from her younger days that had required emergency alterations to fit my frame. The fabric whispered against my skin, soft but foreign, like borrowed confidence. The weight of eyes settled on me, not the dismissive glances I'd been receiving all evening, but something heavier, more intentional. I turned slowly, following the electric sensation up my spine. That's when I first saw him. He stood near the far wall, partially shadowed by a massive floral arrangement. Tall, with broad shoulders encased in a suit that even I could tell cost more than my yearly rent. His dark hair was swept back from a face that belonged in Renaissance paintings, all sharp angles and perfect symmetry. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch. Even from across the room, they burned with an intensity that seemed to strip away all pretense. Behind him, two men in equally expensive suits scanned the room with practiced precision. Bodyguards. The realization should have sent warning bells ringing, but instead, I found myself unable to look away. He raised his crystal tumbler slightly in my direction, the gesture subtle yet unmistakable. I quickly turned back to the safety of the champagne fountain, my cheeks burning. This wasn't my world. I was here to represent Mrs. Whitmore, make a token appearance, and slip away unnoticed. Tomorrow I'd be back in my waitress uniform at Rosie's Diner, serving coffee to truckers and businessmen who tipped 15% on good days. "You look uncomfortable." The voice behind me was deep and carried a slight accent I couldn't place. Something European, with its edges softened by American inflection. I turned, already knowing who I would find. Up close, he was even more overwhelming. His cologne wrapped around me, something woodsy and expensive that made me think of ancient forests and hidden danger. "I'm fine," I managed, clutching my champagne glass like a shield, just not used to these events. His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Neither am I." He extended a hand. "Alexander Volkov." I hesitated before placing my fingers in his. "Emma Carter." His hand enveloped mine completely, warm and strong. He didn't shake it so much as hold it, his thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles before releasing me. "You're not on the guest list, Emma Carter." My heart stuttered. "I'm here for Margaret Whitmore. She couldn't make it. The widow." He nodded once, his eyes never leaving my face. "A family friend? Neighbor." I shifted my weight, suddenly conscious of the worn soles of my only pair of heels. I should probably stay. It wasn't a request. The night is young, and these events are tedious without pleasant company. Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't sound pathetically eager or rudely dismissive, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of men entered, their laughter cutting through the refined murmur of the gala. Something in the atmosphere changed instantly, a subtle tightening, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Alexander's expression hardened to granite. One of his bodyguards leaned in to whisper something in his ear, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod in response. "Who are they?" I asked, curiosity momentarily overriding my nervousness. "Business competitors." His voice had cooled several degrees. "Excuse me for a moment, Emma." He moved away with fluid grace, his guards flanking him as he approached the newcomers. I watched as the group's boisterous energy dimmed under his approach. Words were exchanged, too low to hear, but the tension was palpable even from where I stood. One man, younger than the others, with slicked-back hair and too many rings, gestured wildly, his face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. I should have used the distraction to slip away, to return to my small apartment with its leaking faucet and temperamental heating. Instead, I found myself drifting closer, drawn by some inexplicable gravity. "Disrespectful to bring your lackeys here," the younger man was saying, his voice carrying as the conversation heated. "This is a charity event, not a territory negotiation." "Yet here you are, Marco, making a scene." Alexander's voice remained perfectly level, which somehow made it more threatening. "I believe you were uninvited after last year's incident." Marco's face darkened. "You don't own this city, Volkov. No matter what your father led you to believe." Something dangerous flickered in Alexander's eyes. The bodyguards shifted subtly, hands disappearing inside their jackets. The movement was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost missed it, but I'd spent enough time in rough neighborhoods to recognize the gesture for what it was. They were armed. The realization hit me like ice water. Whoever Alexander Volkov was, he wasn't simply a wealthy businessman. No ordinary entrepreneur needed armed guards or commanded that kind of fear with mere presence. I backed away, suddenly desperate for fresh air. My heel caught on the hem of my borrowed dress, and I stumbled sideways into a waiter carrying a tray of canapes. The tray tilted, sending tiny toast points and caviar scattering across the marble floor like expensive confetti. "I'm so sorry." I dropped to my knees, frantically gathering the ruined hors d'oeuvres as conversations halted and attention turned in my direction. Shame burned through me as I collected soggy toast points with trembling fingers. A pair of polished leather shoes entered my field of vision, followed by a hand extended downward. I looked up to find Alexander standing over me, his expression unreadable. "Leave it," he said quietly. "The staff will handle it." I placed my hand in his and allowed him to pull me to my feet with effortless strength. Behind him, Marco and his companions were watching the scene with undisguised interest. "Who's your new pet, Volkov?" Marco called, emboldened by the audience. "Doesn't seem your usual type. A bit plain for your taste, isn't she?" Something cold and terrible settled in Alexander's expression. The hand still holding mine tightened almost imperceptibly. "Apologize to the lady," he said, his voice soft but carrying across the suddenly silent room. Marco laughed, the sound brittle and forced. "Come on, it was just—" "I said," Alexander interrupted, each word precisely enunciated, "apologize to the lady." The command in his voice was absolute. Every person in the room seemed to hold their breath. Marco's smile faltered. "No offense intended, miss," he muttered, not quite meeting my eyes. The orchestra in the corner, which had paused during the confrontation, tentatively began playing again. A waltz that filled the awkward silence with sweeping strings. Alexander turned to me, his previous coldness melting into something equally intense, but far more personal. "Dance with me," he said, though it wasn't really a request. I glanced around at the crowd still watching us, at the mess on the floor, at Marco's humiliated expression. "I don't think—" "Dance with me," Alexander repeated, his voice dropping lower, "or I'll lose my patience." His eyes flickered toward Marco and his group. "And every man in this room will regret it." As if on cue, the surrounding men, including the security staff and several guests, subtly stepped away, creating a clear path to the dance floor. Even Marco and his companions retreated a few steps. In that moment, I understood that whatever power Alexander Volkov wielded, it was absolute in this circle, and for reasons I couldn't comprehend, I had become entangled in his display of dominance. My options were simple: dance with this dangerous man, or potentially witness something I'd rather not see. "One dance," I whispered, allowing him to lead me to the center of the floor. His hand settled at the small of my back, firm and possessive. "One dance," he agreed, though his tone suggested he was merely humoring me. As he guided me into the waltz with surprising grace for such a formidable man, I caught the scent of his cologne again, mixed now with something metallic and sharp that might have been adrenaline. My borrowed dress swirled around my ankles, and the chandeliers spun overhead like stars caught in a whirlpool. "You've made an enemy tonight," I said quietly, careful to keep my expression neutral for our audience. Alexander's laugh was low and without humor, Marco Ricci was my enemy long before tonight. His father and mine had disagreements. What kind of businessman are you exactly? I dared to ask, though I suspected I already knew the answer. His eyes, a shade of blue so dark they appeared almost black in the dimmed ballroom, held mine. The successful kind, Emma Carter. The kind that makes problems disappear. A chill ran through me, despite the warmth of his hand on my back. I should have been terrified. I should have excused myself the moment the dance ended and run as far as my second-hand heels would carry me. Instead, I found myself oddly transfixed, a rabbit caught in the hypnotic gaze of a predator, unable to look away even as danger loomed. "Why me?" I finally asked as he guided me through a turn. "There must be a dozen more suitable women here. Women from your world." Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps at my directness. "You were the only one who didn't want something from me," he said after a moment. "The only genuine thing in a room full of facades." The music swelled around us, and Alexander pulled me a fraction closer than proper dance etiquette allowed. I should have resisted, maintained some distance, but instead, I found myself yielding to his lead, to the strange electricity that seemed to arc between us. "And now?" I asked, my voice barely audible above the orchestra. His lips curved into that not-quite smile again. "Now I find myself wanting something from you." The waltz ended before I could respond, the final notes hanging in the air between us like an unfinished conversation. Alexander's hand lingered on mine as he stepped back, his eyes never leaving my face. "Thank you for the dance, Emma Carter," he said formally, though there was nothing formal about the way he was looking at me. Like I was a puzzle he intended to solve piece by piece. I should have walked away. Should have thanked Mrs. Whitmore for the opportunity, returned her dress with a polite note, and forgotten this night ever happened. Instead, I made the first in what would prove to be a series of fateful mistakes. "Perhaps another," I suggested, heart hammering against my ribs. Something darkly satisfied crossed his expression. "I thought you'd never ask." As he led me into a second dance, I caught Marco Ricci watching us from the edge of the room, his expression a complex mixture of fear and calculation. Over Alexander's shoulder, his bodyguards maintained their vigilance, scanning the crowd with practiced efficiency. I had stepped into something far beyond my understanding, a world of power plays and dangerous men, of wealth that bought loyalty and silence in equal measure. And as Alexander's hand tightened possessively at my waist, I realized with startling clarity that I might never find my way out again. The chandeliers above us cast our intertwined shadows across the marble floor, a kaleidoscope of light and dark, choice and consequence. Tomorrow seemed a lifetime away, and my small apartment and diner uniform belonged to another person entirely. Tonight, I belonged to the dance, to the moment, to him, though I didn't yet understand what that would mean. The night stretched on like a fever dream. One dance became 2, then 3, until I lost count entirely. Alexander kept me at his side even after the music ended, his hand resting possessively at the small of my back as he guided me through conversations with people whose names and titles blurred together in my memory. "Smile," he murmured against my ear during a particularly tedious exchange with an older couple. "Dimitri is a business associate. His wife collects gossip like some collect art." I forced my lips into what I hoped was a convincing smile, though my face had begun to ache from the effort. The woman, Katrina, studied me with the clinical interest of an entomologist examining a new species of insect. "How did you two meet?" she asked, her accent similar to Alexander's but more pronounced. "Alec never brings dates to these functions." Before I could stammer out the truth, that we'd met barely 2 hours ago, Alexander's arm slid around my waist. "Emma is a friend of Margaret Whitmore," he said smoothly. "I've been trying to convince her to accompany me for some time." The lie rolled off his tongue with such ease that I nearly believed it myself. Katerina certainly did, her previously suspicious expression softening into something like approval. "Margaret has excellent taste," she said, patting my arm with bejeweled fingers. "You must join us for dinner next week, both of you." Alexander inclined his head in what might have been agreement or merely acknowledgement, then steered me away before I could say something to contradict his fabrication. "Why did you lie?" I asked once we were out of earshot. the question slipping out before I could reconsider. He looked down at me with mild amusement. Would you prefer I told them I spotted you across the room and decided to make you mine? Heat rushed to my face. I'm not yet, he agreed, his voice dropping to a register that sent shivers down my spine. But the night is still young. A server appeared at his elbow, offering champagne. Alexander selected 2 glasses and handed one to me, his fingers brushing mine deliberately. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. I hesitated, then touched my glass to his. To truth, I countered. Something like respect flickered in his eyes before he took a sip. I did the same, the champagne sliding down my throat in an effervescent rush that did nothing to calm my nerves. One of his bodyguards approached, leaning in to whisper something. Alexander's expression hardened momentarily, before returning to its usual inscrutable calm. I need to step away briefly, he told me. Business that can't wait. Victor will stay with you. Before I could protest, he was gone, moving through the crowd with purposeful strides. In his place stood the taller of his 2 guards, Victor, apparently, a mountain of a man with close-cropped blonde hair and a face that seemed permanently set in disapproval. Mr. Volkov said to ensure your comfort, he stated flatly, his accent thicker than Alexander's. Do you require anything? What I required was a moment alone to collect my thoughts, to make sense of the whirlwind evening and the magnetic pull of a man I should, by all logic, be running from. Just some air, I said, gesturing toward the balcony doors visible through the crowd. If that's allowed. Victor's expression didn't change, but he nodded once and began clearing a path through the glittering attendees. People moved aside without question, their conversations faltering as we passed. I felt their curious glances like physical touches against my skin. The night air hit me like salvation when we finally stepped onto the balcony. The sounds of the gala muted behind us, replaced by the distant hum of city traffic and the whisper of wind through decorative topiaries. I moved to the stone balustrade and gripped it with both hands, letting the cool night air clear my champagne-fogged mind. Who is he, really? I asked without turning, the question directed at Victor, but mostly at the indifferent stars above. For a long moment, there was only silence, and I thought he might not answer. Then his heavily accented voice came from behind me, measured and careful. Mr. Volkov is a businessman with varied interests. Import, export, real estate, security. Security? I repeated, turning to face him. Is that what you call it? Victor's face remained impassive. It is what we call it. A door opened at the far end of the balcony, spilling light and music into our quiet sanctuary. Marco Ricci stumbled through, his movements suggesting he'd had considerably more to drink since our earlier encounter. He froze when he saw us, swaying slightly on his feet. Well, he slurred, his gaze fixing on me with unpleasant intensity. Volkov's new toy, left all alone. Victor moved with surprising speed for a man his size, positioning himself between Marco and me. Return inside, Mr. Ricci. You are intoxicated. Marco's laugh was ugly. And you're what? Her babysitter? Where's your boss? Found someone more interesting already? My fingers tightened on the stone balustrade. Mr. Volkov stepped away on business. He'll be back shortly. Business, Marco repeated, making the word sound obscene. Is that what he told you? Let me guess. He spotted you across the room, decided you were different from other women, made you feel special? His lip curled. It's his routine. Next week it'll be someone else. Victor took a step forward. Last warning, Mr. Ricci. Ask him about Natalia, Marco continued, his eyes locked on mine even as he retreated a step. Ask him what happens to his different women when he gets bored. Before Victor could respond, the main balcony doors swung open, and Alexander emerged. The change in atmosphere was immediate and electric. Marco's bravado visibly wilted under Alexander's cold gaze. I believe you were just leaving, Alexander stated, the words clipped and precise. Marco's jaw worked, but whatever courage the alcohol had granted him evaporated under that stare. He muttered something unintelligible and slipped past Alexander, back into the safety of the crowded ballroom. Silence descended, broken only by the distant sounds of the gala and the city beyond. Alexander dismissed Victor with a slight nod, waiting until the bodyguard had positioned himself by the balcony doors before approaching me. "Did he upset you?" he asked, his voice deceptively gentle. I studied his face, searching for any sign that Marco's words had affected him. There was nothing. His expression remained as controlled and unreadable as ever. "Who is Natalia?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Marco speaks of things he doesn't understand." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed, moving closer. "It's not." He stood beside me at the balustrade now, close enough that I could feel the heat of him against the cool night air. Below us, the city sprawled in a tapestry of lights and shadows, cars moving like blood cells through illuminated arteries. "There are things about me you shouldn't know, Emma," he said after a moment, his voice lower. "Things that would make you run if you were wise." I turned to face him fully. "Then why am I here? Why single me out?" He studied me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Because when I saw you across that room, trying so hard to disappear, I recognized something." His hand rose, knuckles brushing lightly against my cheek. "You're trapped, just as I am. Different cages, perhaps, but cages nonetheless." The touch of his hand sent electricity skittering across my skin. "I'm not trapped," I protested, though even to my own ears the words sounded hollow. "I can walk away any time." His smile held no humor. "Can you? Try it. Walk back through those doors, through the ballroom, and out the main entrance. See how far you get before you turn around." Indignation flared, burning away some of the fog that had surrounded me all evening. "You think quite highly of yourself." "No," he said softly. "I think something recognized something else tonight. Call it fate, call it chemistry, call it mutual self-destruction, but don't pretend you don't feel it too." The worst part was that he was right. Something had clicked into place the moment our eyes met across the ballroom. A key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. I wanted to deny it, to prove him wrong by walking away. But the truth hummed between us like a live wire. "I should go home," I said instead, the words sounding weak even to my own ears. "Where is home?" he asked, his hand dropping from my face. "A little apartment in East Ridge, nothing special." "Alone?" The question hung in the air between us, weighted with implication. "Yes," I admitted, "alone." Something like satisfaction flickered across his features. "My car can take you." It wasn't a request, and something told me that if I refused, I'd find his sleek black car following my taxi anyway. "Fine," I conceded, "but just a ride home. Nothing more." His lips curved. "Of course." We returned to the gala long enough for Alexander to make our excuses to the hosts, something about an early morning commitment that sounded rehearsed and hollow to my ears. No one questioned it. No one dared. The night air had turned colder during our time on the balcony. I shivered in my borrowed dress as we descended the hotel's grand front steps, where a gleaming black Bentley waited at the curb. Victor held the rear door open while the other bodyguard, whose name I still didn't know, scanned the street with wary eyes. "After you," Alexander said, his hand at the small of my back, guiding me forward. I hesitated at the car door. "You don't need to come with me. I can give the driver my address." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened slightly. "I insist." Against my better judgment, I slid into the leather interior, the seat cool and buttery soft beneath my fingers. Alexander followed, settling beside me with easy grace. The door closed with a solid thunk, sealing us in a cocoon of luxury and silence. "East Ridge," he told the driver, then pressed a button that raised a privacy partition between the front and back seats. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding into the late-night traffic with barely a sound. I stared out the window, watching the opulent downtown buildings gradually give way to more modest structures as we headed east. "You're very quiet," Alexander observed after several minutes of silence. I turned to find him watching me, his face half-shadowed in the dimly lit interior. "I'm trying to make sense of tonight." "What's there to make sense of? We met. We danced. I'm taking you home." "Is that all this is?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. He shifted slightly, his knee brushing against mine in the confined space. "For tonight, yes." The implication that there would be more nights hung unspoken between us. I should have protested. Should have made it clear that this was a one-time encounter never to be repeated. Instead, I found myself studying the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands rested with casual confidence on his thighs. "Tell me about yourself, Emma Carter," he said, breaking into my thoughts. I gave a small, humorless laugh. "There's not much to tell. 26, waitress at Rosie's Diner, barely making rent most months, no family to speak of, not exactly a riveting biography." "No family at all?" Something in his tone made me glance at him sharply. "My parents died when I was 19. Car accident. No siblings." I paused, uncertain why I was sharing these details with a virtual stranger. "What about you?" His expression shuddered slightly. "My father passed last year. My mother lives in Moscow. I have a younger sister who refuses to speak to me." "Why?" "She disapproves of the family business." I thought of the armed bodyguards, of Marco Ricci's fear, of the way people had parted before Alexander like water around a stone. "Can't imagine why," I murmured. To my surprise, he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face, making him look younger and less forbidding. "You have fire in you, Emma Carter. I like that." The car slowed, turning onto my street with its row of aging apartment buildings. I hadn't told the driver my exact address, yet he navigated directly to my building without hesitation. "How did you—" I began, then stopped as realization dawned. "You already knew where I lived." Alexander didn't deny it. "I like to be informed." The car rolled to a stop in front of my building. Through the window, I could see the flickering exterior light that the landlord had been promising to fix for months, the cracked concrete steps leading to the security door with its broken intercom. "Not exactly the Ritz," I said, suddenly embarrassed by the contrast between the luxury of the Bentley and the shabbiness of my home. "Appearances can be deceiving," Alexander replied, his eyes never leaving my face. "What matters is what lies beneath." The driver opened my door, standing at attention beside it. I gathered my borrowed clutch and prepared to exit, only to find Alexander's hand on my wrist, his touch light but unmistakably restraining. "Have dinner with me tomorrow," he said. The words framed as a request but delivered as a command. I should have said no, should have thanked him for the ride and disappeared into my building, back into my real life with its predictable rhythms and manageable dangers. Instead, I heard myself ask, "What time?" Satisfaction gleamed in his eyes. 7. "I'll send a car." "I can meet you somewhere," I countered, trying to maintain some illusion of control. His thumb brushed lightly over my pulse point, sending a shiver up my arm. 7, he repeated. "The car will be waiting." I slipped from his grasp and out of the vehicle, the night air cool after the warmth of the Bentley's interior. Alexander remained seated but leaned forward slightly. "Sweet dreams, Emma Carter," he said, his voice a low promise that followed me up the cracked concrete steps. I didn't look back as I fumbled with my keys, aware of the idling car, of Alexander's eyes on me until I disappeared into the relative safety of my building's dingy lobby. Only when I reached my apartment on the 4th floor, climbing the stairs because the elevator was perpetually out of order, did I allow myself to exhale fully. I kicked off my uncomfortable heels and sank onto the edge of my sagging mattress, still wrapped in Mrs. Whitmore's elegant dress that now seemed as out of place in my tiny apartment as I had felt at the gala. My phone chirped with an incoming message. The number was unfamiliar. Until tomorrow. AI stared at the screen, a mixture of dread and anticipation coiling in my stomach. How had he gotten my number? I hadn't given it to him. Hadn't given him my address either, yet he'd known exactly where I lived. Another message appeared below the first. "Don't overthink it," as if he could see me, could read my thoughts across the distance between us. I set the phone down carefully, as though it might bite, and moved to the window. The Bentley was gone, the street empty save for a few parked cars and the occasional passerby. Yet as I stared out at the night-shrouded city, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, that I had walked willingly into something I didn't understand, a gilded cage whose door had just closed behind me with the softest of clicks. I drew the threadbare curtains and turned away from the window, but sleep eluded me long into the night. My dreams haunted by a waltz that never ended, and eyes that burned with dangerous promise. Morning arrived with harsh clarity, sunlight streaming through my thin curtains to illuminate the reality of my apartment. The water stains spreading across the ceiling, the mismatched furniture collected from thrift stores and sidewalk discards, the pile of bills on my kitchenette counter. Mrs. Whitmore's elegant dress hung from my closet door like a beautiful hallucination, the only tangible proof that last night had actually happened. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, another message from the unknown number, from Alexander. "Good morning, Emma. The car will collect you at 6:30. I stared at the screen, torn between exhilaration and unease. Last night's champagne-infused bravery had dissipated with the morning light, leaving only questions. Who was this man, really? What did he want from me? And why was I so drawn to someone who radiated danger from every pore? My shift at Rosie's Diner started at noon, giving me plenty of time to return Mrs. Whitmore's dress and check on her condition. I dressed quickly in jeans and a faded t-shirt, carefully packing the gown in the garment bag she'd lent me. The morning was crisp, autumn asserting itself in the reddening leaves and cool breeze as I walked the 3 blocks to Mrs. Whitmore's brownstone. Unlike my dilapidated apartment building, her home stood proudly on a tree-lined street, its brick facade weathered but dignified. I rang the bell, shifting my weight nervously from foot to foot. Mrs. Whitmore answered wearing a silk robe, her silver hair pinned neatly despite her illness. "Emma, dear," she greeted me, voice slightly hoarse but warm. Come in, come in." I followed her into the parlor, where sunlight filtered through lace curtains onto antique furniture. The room smelled of chamomile tea and the rose potpourri she made each summer. "How are you feeling?" I asked, setting the garment bag carefully across a chair. "Much better today," she assured me, settling onto her floral sofa with the grace of a woman half her age. "But never mind that. Tell me about the gala. Did you enjoy yourself?" The question seemed inadequate for the whirlwind of the previous night. "It was unexpected," I admitted, perching on the edge of an armchair. "I met someone." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes sparkled with interest. "Oh? Anyone I might know?" I hesitated. "Alexander Volkov." The change in her expression was subtle, but unmistakable, a tightening around her eyes, a slight stiffening of her posture. "I see," she said carefully. "And how did you find Mr. Volkov?" "You know him," I stated rather than asked, watching her reaction. Mrs. Whitmore sighed, reaching for the teacup on the side table beside her. "I knew his father, Mikhail, and I've met Alexander at various functions over the years." She took a deliberate sip before continuing. "The Volkovs have been influential in this city for 2 decades, ever since they arrived from Russia." "What kind of influence?" I pressed, thinking of the armed bodyguards, of Marco Ricci's fear. Her gaze met mine steadily. "The kind that doesn't bear close examination, dear." She set her cup down with a gentle clink. "Alexander has taken over most of his father's enterprises since Mikhail's passing last year." I swallowed hard. "Is he dangerous?" "Everyone with power is dangerous to someone," she replied, the non-answer hanging between us. "He asked me to dinner tonight." Mrs. Whitmore's fingers tightened around her teacup. "And will you go?" "I already said yes," I admitted. "But now I'm not sure it's wise." She was quiet for a long moment, studying me with eyes that had seen far more of life than I had. "Alexander Volkov is not a man one says no to lightly," she finally said. "But neither is he his father, for better or worse." "What does that mean?" "It means," she said carefully, "that Mikhail was cruel by nature and calculation. Alexander, from what I've observed, is calculating but not inherently cruel. He can be protective of what he considers his." The possessive way his hand had settled on my waist, the intensity in his gaze when he'd said he wanted to make me his, it all flashed through my memory with new significance. "I'm not his," I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. Mrs. Whitmore's smile held no humor. "Not yet, perhaps." I left her brownstone with more questions than answers, her parting words echoing in my mind. "Be careful, Emma. Men like Alexander Volkov don't pursue women casually. Whatever has drawn his attention to you, it won't be easily diverted." The rest of the day passed in a blur of coffee refills and greasy orders at Rosie's diner. I moved through my shift on autopilot, my mind elsewhere, in a glittering ballroom, in the back of a luxury car, in the promise of the evening to come. "You're a million miles away today," Rosie herself commented, as I absent-mindedly wiped down the counter for the third time. The diner's owner was a heavy-set woman in her 50s, with streaked blonde hair and the permanent scent of fryer oil clinging to her uniform. "Hot date tonight?" I forced a smile. "Something like that." "Well, whoever he is, he's got you walking on clouds," she observed, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. "Just remember to keep one foot on the ground, honey. Men are temporary. Rent is forever." I laughed despite myself. "Yes, ma'am." My shift ended at 6, giving me barely enough time to rush home and prepare for Alexander's car. I showered quickly, letting hot water wash away the smell of diner grease and coffee. Standing before my closet afterward, wrapped in a threadbare towel, I confronted the reality of my wardrobe. Nothing suitable for dinner with a man whose watch probably cost more than my yearly rent. As if summoned by my despair, a knock sounded at my apartment door. Clutching my towel tighter, I peered through the peephole to find a young woman in a crisp black suit, holding a large white box. "Delivery for Emma Carter," she called through the door. "From Mr. Volkov." I hesitated, then cracked the door open, keeping my body hidden behind it. "I'm Emma." She offered the box with a professional smile. "Mr. Volkov thought you might appreciate this for this evening. The car will arrive at 6:30 as scheduled." Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, her mission apparently completed. I carried the box to my bed and lifted the lid with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay a dress of deep emerald silk that caught the light like water. Beneath it were a pair of black heels that looked both elegant and, miraculously, my size. A small card rested atop the ensemble, something to match your eyes. The gesture was both thoughtful and presumptuous, a gift that erased my agency in choosing my own appearance. Yet, as I lifted the dress and held it against me, I couldn't deny the thrill that ran through me. The fabric was exquisite, the design simple but sophisticated in a way that spoke of restrained wealth rather than ostentation. I slipped it on, the silk cool against my skin, and turned to the small mirror on my closet door. The reflection startled me. The dress fit as though it had been made for me, highlighting curves I usually concealed beneath waitress uniforms and casual clothes. It made my eyes look greener, my skin paler, my hair darker. It made me look like someone who belonged on Alexander Volkov's arm. Precisely at 6:30, my phone buzzed with a message. "Your car is waiting." I gathered a small purse, my own this time, containing only my keys, phone, and ID. No money. I somehow knew Alexander would consider it an insult if I tried to pay for anything tonight. The same black Bentley from last night idled at the curb, Victor standing beside the rear door with impassive professionalism. He nodded once in acknowledgement as I approached. "Good evening, Miss Carter. You look lovely." The compliment, delivered in his heavily accented voice without any change in his stoic expression, caught me off guard. "Thank you, Victor." He opened the door, and I slid into the leather interior, half expecting to find Alexander waiting. Instead, the back seat was empty, the privacy partition already raised. The drive took us downtown, past the glittering high-rises and exclusive boutiques, then unexpectedly turned toward the river that bisected the city. We followed the winding riverside road until the urban landscape gave way to more isolated properties set back from the street behind ornate gates and high walls. Finally, the car turned into a long, tree-lined driveway, approaching a mansion that seemed to rise from the landscape like a modernist vision in stone and glass. Security cameras tracked our progress, and as we neared the main entrance, I glimpsed men in dark suits positioned discreetly around the perimeter. Victor opened my door and offered his hand to help me out. "Mr. Volkov is waiting in the main house," he said, gesturing toward massive double doors of dark wood and frosted glass. I hesitated, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of where I was, at the private home of a man who was, despite our charged encounters, still essentially a stranger, a dangerous stranger, if Mrs. Whitmore's careful words and my own instincts were to be believed. "Is everything all right, Miss Carter?" Victor asked, his expression unchanged but his tone suggesting genuine concern. "Yes," I lied, smoothing down the silk of my borrowed dress, just taking it all in. The front doors opened before we reached them, revealing a sleek interior of polished concrete floors, minimalist furnishings, and strategic lighting that highlighted what appeared to be museum-quality art on the walls. A man I didn't recognize, not the second bodyguard from the gala, nodded respectfully. "Miss Carter," he greeted me. "Mr. Volkov is on the terrace. Please follow me." I was led through the expansive main floor, past spaces that blurred together in my nervous state. A living room with a fireplace large enough to stand in, a dining room dominated by a table that could seat 20, a kitchen where staff moved with quiet efficiency. Finally, glass doors slid open to reveal a stone terrace overlooking the river, the city skyline visible in the distance as twilight settled over the water. Alexander stood at the terrace's edge, his back to me, silhouetted against the darkening sky. He turned at the sound of our approach, and the intensity of his gaze as it traveled over me sent heat rushing to my cheeks. "Emma," he said, my name in his mouth sounding like something precious. "You look beautiful." He himself wore a simple black shirt open at the collar, sleeves rolled to reveal strong forearms, and dark trousers that emphasized his height and lean strength, less formal than at the gala, but no less commanding. "Thank you for the dress," I said, finding my voice. "It wasn't necessary. I disagree." He moved closer, circling me slowly, his eyes appreciative but calculating. "It suits you perfectly. I knew it would." I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Do you always dress your dinner guests?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Only the special ones." The man who had escorted me cleared his throat discreetly. "Dinner is ready to be served whenever you wish, sir." Alexander nodded dismissal, his eyes never leaving my face. "Would you like a tour of the house first? Or perhaps a drink?" "A drink," I decided, needing something to steady my nerves. He guided me to a seating area on the terrace, his hand at the small of my back, that same possessive touch from the gala. A bottle of champagne already waited in an ice bucket beside 2 crystal flutes. "You seem tense," he observed as he poured the champagne, the golden liquid catching the light from the terrace lanterns. "I'm dining at the home of a man I barely know, wearing a dress he purchased for me after being driven here in his car," I replied, accepting the flute he offered. "Forgive me if I'm a little on edge." Alexander settled beside me on the cushioned bench, close enough that his thigh brushed against mine. "You don't trust me." "Should I?" I countered, taking a sip of champagne to hide my nervousness. He studied me for a long moment. "No," he finally said, surprising me with his honesty. "You shouldn't trust anyone in this world, Emma. Least of all men with power. Then why am I here?" His eyes darkened. "Because despite that wisdom, there's something between us that defies rational caution. I felt it the moment I saw you. You felt it too." The truth of his words resonated uncomfortably. There was something between us, a pull as inexorable as gravity, drawing me toward him despite every warning bell in my mind. "Tell me about your business," I said, changing the subject. "The real version, not what you tell people at charity galas." Alexander's expression shuddered slightly, but he didn't feign ignorance. "My family has interests in shipping, real estate, private security, and certain regulatory services." "Regulatory services," I repeated skeptically. "Is that what they're calling organized crime these days?" I regretted the words the moment they left my mouth, half expecting anger or denial. Instead, Alexander laughed, that same genuine laugh from the car ride, transforming his severe features into something almost boyish. "You really do have fire," he said, his eyes warming with what seemed like genuine appreciation. "Yes, Emma. Some would call it organized crime. Others would call it filling the gaps left by inefficient governance. It depends on your perspective." "And your perspective is?" He sipped his champagne thoughtfully. "My perspective is that I inherited an empire built by my father, an empire with thousands of employees who depend on me, with operations spanning continents, with enemies waiting for any sign of weakness." His voice hardened slightly. "I didn't choose this life, Emma, but I won't apologize for excelling within its constraints." I thought of my own constraints, the diner job that barely covered rent, the community college degree I'd had to abandon after my parents' death, the narrowing of possibilities with each passing year. "We're all trapped in something," I murmured, echoing his words from the gala. Alexander's eyes met mine, something like recognition flashing in their depths. Yes, he agreed softly. We are. A comfortable silence settled between us as the city lights began twinkling across the river, stars appearing in the darkening sky above. The breeze carried the scent of the water mingled with the subtle cologne Alexander wore, the same woodsy fragrance from the night before. Shall we eat? He suggested after our glasses were empty, rising and offering his hand. I placed my fingers in his, allowing him to guide me back through the glass doors, into a smaller, more intimate dining room than the formal one we'd passed earlier. A table for two had been set near windows overlooking the terrace and river beyond, candles flickering between elegant place settings. Staff appeared as if conjured, serving a first course of some delicate seafood creation that melted on my tongue. Wine replaced champagne, a ruby red vintage that Alexander mentioned was from his private collection, but whose name meant nothing to me. Conversation flowed more easily with each course, Alexander proving himself unexpectedly knowledgeable about art, literature, even the obscure indie bands I listened to during my rare free time. I found myself relaxing despite my earlier reservations, drawn into his orbit by more than just physical attraction or danger, by genuine intellectual connection. How do you know about the Black Keys' early albums? I asked, genuinely surprised when he referenced a particularly obscure track from one of my favorite bands. A shadow crossed his face briefly. My sister, he said after a moment. Anya. She is passionate about music. I remembered his earlier mention of a sister who refused to speak to him. The one who disapproves of the family business? Yes. His expression closed like shutters being drawn. She left for university in California 5 years ago, changed her name. Contacts our mother occasionally but refuses to speak to me. The pain in his voice seemed genuine, a crack in his otherwise impenetrable facade. I'm sorry, I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand before I could think better of it. He turned his palm upward, capturing my fingers with his. Don't be. She's safer away from all this. His thumb traced circles on my wrist, sending shivers up my arm. Which is why I should be strong enough to let you walk away too. My breath caught. But you're not going to. His eyes locked with mine, darkening with intent. No, he admitted quietly. I'm not. The rest of dinner passed in a haze of exquisite food and charged glances, Alexander's hand finding excuses to touch mine, his knee pressing against mine beneath the table. By the time dessert was served, some confection of chocolate and berries I barely tasted, the tension between us had built to something almost unbearable. Would you like to see the rest of the house? He asked, as staff cleared our plates, his voice dropping to a register that made his true meaning clear. I hesitated at the threshold of a decision that would irrevocably change the course of my life. Walking deeper into Alexander Volkov's world meant accepting all that came with it, the danger, the moral compromises, the gilded cage he seemed eager to construct around me. Show me, I said, the words barely audible. He led me through the massive house, pointing out architectural features and art pieces with the knowledge of a true collector. But I registered little of it, too aware of his proximity, of the growing inevitability between us. We passed rooms whose purposes I could only guess at, doors that remained firmly closed, and security personnel who nodded respectfully as we passed. Finally, we reached what appeared to be a private wing, the atmosphere shifting from showcase to personal space. Alexander opened a door to reveal a study lined with bookshelves, a massive desk of dark wood positioned before windows that framed the now night-shrouded river. My sanctuary, he said, allowing me to enter first. Few people are ever invited here. I moved to the bookshelves, running my fingers along leather-bound spines. Many of the titles were in Cyrillic, but others were English classics. Dostoevsky beside Dickens, Tolstoy alongside Twain. You're full of contradictions, I observed, turning to find him watching me with that same intense focus. As are you, he countered, moving closer. The waitress with the soul of a poet. The woman who recognizes danger yet walks toward it willingly. He stood before me now, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could catch the mingled scents of wine and cologne on his breath. Why me? I asked again, the question that had haunted me since the gala. Of all the women you could have, why single out someone like me? Alexander's hand rose to cup my cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man with so much power at his disposal. "Because you look at me and see the man, not the position. Because your eyes hold secrets as deep as my own. Because when I'm with you, the cage door opens, just a little." He leaned down, his intention clear, giving me time to retreat if I wished. Instead, I rose on tiptoes to meet him halfway, my hands settling on the solid warmth of his chest as our lips met. The kiss began gently, almost tentatively, but quickly ignited into something more desperate, more consuming. His arms encircled me, drawing me against the hard planes of his body as my fingers threaded through his hair, anchoring him to me. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, his eyes had darkened to midnight. "Stay with me tonight," he said, the words somewhere between question and command. I knew I stood at a crossroads. To say yes was to step fully into Alexander's world, with all its darkness and danger. To say no was to return to my small apartment, my diner uniform, my life of quiet desperation, but with my independence intact. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. "Yes," I whispered against his mouth, feeling his smile curve against my lips before he kissed me again, deeper this time, with a possessiveness that both thrilled and frightened me. As he led me from the study toward what I assumed was his bedroom, a phone rang, not the subtle chime of a cell phone, but an actual landline, its sharp trill cutting through the charged atmosphere between us. Alexander froze, his expression shifting from desire to something colder, more controlled. "I need to take that," he said, his voice tight with regret, and something that might have been concern. "Wait here. I won't be long." He returned to the study, closing the door behind him with a soft click that nonetheless felt definitive. I stood in the hallway, the spell of the moment broken, rational thought beginning to reassert itself in the absence of his overwhelming presence. What was I doing? Getting involved with a man who all but admitted to running a criminal organization. A man whose very attention put me at risk. If Mrs. Whitmore's careful warnings and Marco's more direct ones were any indication, I moved to the window at the end of the hallway, looking out at the manicured grounds, now cast in shadow and moonlight. Security personnel patrolled the perimeter, their movements precise and professional. Beyond them lay the river, the city, my apartment, my life, all seemingly a world away now. The study door opened, and Alexander emerged, his expression carefully controlled, but tension evident in the set of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "Is everything all right?" I asked, watching his face for clues. "A business matter that requires my immediate attention," he said, his voice clipped. "I need to go out. Victor will take you home." The dismissal was as unexpected as it was abrupt, leaving me momentarily speechless. Just minutes ago, he had been kissing me senseless, asking me to stay the night. Now he couldn't get me out of his house fast enough. Just like that, I finally managed, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. Something like regret flickered across his features. He moved closer, taking my hands in his. "It's not what I want, Emma, but this can't wait. And I won't leave you alone here. Will you tell me what's happening?" "No." The word was absolute, allowing no argument. Then, more gently, "Some aspects of my life must remain separate from you for your own protection." I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the steel in his voice made it clear that further questions would be futile. Instead, I nodded once, drawing my hands from his. "Victor is waiting at the front entrance," Alexander said, his tone softening slightly. "I'll call you tomorrow." He leaned in to brush his lips against mine, a brief touch that held promise rather than passion, then turned and strode away, already pulling a phone from his pocket and speaking rapidly in what sounded like Russian. I made my way back through the house alone, the room suddenly seeming colder, more imposing without Alexander beside me. Victor waited at the front door as promised, his expression as impassive as ever. "Mr. Volkov sends his apologies for the abrupt end to the evening," he said, as he escorted me to the waiting car. The drive back to my apartment passed in silence, my mind replaying the evening's events. The connection I'd felt with Alexander, the desire that had flared between us, the sudden interruption that had sent me home alone. As the Bentley pulled up to my building, Victor opened my door with his usual efficiency. Mr. Volkov wanted me to assure you he will contact you tomorrow, he said, his tone suggesting this was a message he'd been specifically instructed to deliver. I nodded, too emotionally exhausted for words, and made my way up to my apartment. Only when I was inside, door locked behind me, did I allow myself to fully process the whirlwind of the past 24 hours. The emerald dress hung from my body like a second skin, a tangible reminder of a world I had briefly touched, a world of wealth and power and darkness that both attracted and terrified me. I slipped it off carefully, hanging it in my closet beside Mrs. Whitmore's returned gown, then stood under a hot shower until my skin turned pink, trying to wash away the confusion, the desire, the lingering scent of Alexander's cologne. As I crawled into bed, my phone chimed with an incoming message. Sleep well, Emma. What was interrupted tonight will be continued. Soon. I stared at the screen, a shiver that was not entirely fear racing down my spine. Whatever game we were playing, whatever path I had started down, it was clear that Alexander Volkov had no intention of letting me walk away, and despite everything, the warnings, the danger, the glimpse of his world's darkness, I wasn't sure I wanted to. I woke to insistent knocking at my apartment door. Bleary-eyed and disoriented, I fumbled for my phone. 7:15 a.m., too early for any reasonable visitor. The knocking continued, more urgent now. Coming, I called, wrapping myself in a robe and hurrying to the door. Through the peephole, I saw Mrs. Whitmore, her normally composed face tight with concern. I yanked the door open. Mrs. Whitmore, is everything okay? She pushed past me into the apartment, glancing back toward the stairwell before closing the door firmly behind her. We need to talk, Emma, about Alexander Volkov. My stomach dropped. How did you know? Everyone knows, she interrupted, her voice unusually sharp. That's the problem. She moved to my window, peering through the curtains at the street below. Whatever she saw there deepened the lines around her mouth. You went to his home last night. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway, suddenly conscious of how thin my robe was, how obvious it must be that she'd woken me. He invited me to dinner. Mrs. Whitmore turned from the window, her eyes taking in the emerald dress draped over my single chair where I'd left it after last night's abrupt ending. And he gave you gifts. It's just a dress, I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. It's never just a dress with men like Alexander Volkov. She sank onto the edge of my unmade bed, suddenly looking every one of her 70-plus years. Sit down, Emma. There are things you need to understand. I perched beside her, pulling my robe tighter against the morning chill and the gravity in her voice. You're scaring me. Good, she said simply. You should be scared. Becoming involved with Alexander puts you in danger, and not just from his enemies. What do you mean? Mrs. Whitmore sighed, her hands twisting in her lap. I told you I knew his father, Mikhail. What I didn't tell you is how well I knew him. She paused, seeming to gather herself. 30 years ago, I was you, Emma. Young, struggling, dreaming of something more, and Mikhail Volkov noticed me. The revelation stunned me into silence. I tried to reconcile the elegant, proper woman beside me with someone who had been involved with a man like Mikhail Volkov. We met at a gallery opening. I was working as a server, just as you work at that diner. He singled me out, pursued me with an intensity that was, she paused, searching for the right word, intoxicating. Within weeks, I had moved into his house, was wearing clothes he selected, meeting people he approved of. I believed I was in love. What happened? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Her eyes met mine, steady despite the pain reflected there. I became his possession, not his partner. The cage door closed so gradually I hardly noticed until it was too late. She reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Mikhail had a terrible temper and terrible jealousy. The implication hung in the air between us. I thought of Alexander's controlled intensity, the possessiveness in his touch. Alexander isn't his father, I said quietly. No, she agreed. He's not, but the apple rarely falls far from the tree. And he was raised in Mikhail's shadow, watching his father's methods, absorbing his lessons. She squeezed my hand. The car that's been parked across the street since dawn. Those are Alexander's men. Watching you. Protecting you, perhaps, but also monitoring you. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? Mrs. Whitmore nodded toward the window. Black sedan. 2 men inside. They followed me when I left my house to come here. I rose and moved to the window, carefully parting the curtains just enough to peek through. Sure enough, a black car idled at the curb, its windows tinted but not enough to completely obscure the silhouettes of 2 men in the front seats. I didn't give him permission to have me watched, I said, anger rising through my shock. Men like Alexander don't seek permission, Emma. They take what they want and justify it as protection, as care, as love. Mrs. Whitmore stood, moving to join me at the window. I managed to get away from Mikhail only because he allowed it, because I was pregnant, and the child wasn't his. I turned to her, stunned by this new revelation. You have a child. Pain flashed across her features. Had, she corrected gently. A daughter. She died in childbirth, along with her baby. Mikhail let me go because I was damaged goods to him by then, but he never quite released his claim on me. Even after he married Alexander's mother, he would send gifts on my birthday, have men check on me periodically. The parallels to my own situation were too stark to ignore. The unexpected attention from a powerful man, the gifts, the surveillance. Why are you telling me this now? Because last night, after you left Alexander's house, there was an incident. A man was found in the river, Marco Ricci. The name hit me like a physical blow. I remembered his drunken confrontation on the balcony, his warnings about a woman named Natalia, his obvious fear of Alexander. Is he dead? No, not yet, but in critical condition at Mercy Hospital. The official story is that he was mugged and thrown from the riverside path, but nobody believes that. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes held mine. This is the world you're stepping into, Emma. A world where people who cause problems disappear or have accidents, where women become possessions to be controlled and monitored. I sank back onto the bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Alexander had to leave suddenly last night, I murmured. Said it was business that couldn't wait. Mrs. Whitmore's expression softened with something like pity. I don't know if Alexander ordered this attack personally. He's more calculated than his father was, less prone to emotional violence, but it happened under his authority, in his territory, to a man who had publicly disrespected him. And you. My phone chimed from the nightstand. With trembling fingers I reached for it, somehow knowing who the message would be from. Good morning, Emma. I hope you slept well. Car will collect you at noon for lunch. Another message appeared below it almost immediately. Wear the green dress again. I couldn't stop thinking about how beautiful you looked in it. Mrs. Whitmore didn't need to see the screen to understand. He's summoning you, she said, not unkindly. What will you do? It was the question I'd been asking myself since the gala, since the first moment Alexander's eyes had locked with mine across that glittering ballroom. What would I do? Continue down this path with a man who represented everything dangerous and seductive about power? Or retreat to the safety of my ordinary life, with its ordinary struggles and predictable limitations? I don't know, I admitted, setting the phone aside. Mrs. Whitmore nodded, as though my uncertainty confirmed something for her. When I left Mikhail, I had nothing. No money, no connections, no protection. He could have destroyed me with a word. Do you know why he didn't? I shook my head. Because I knew things. Secrets. Details about his business, his associates, his methods. She straightened her shoulders. Information is protection, Emma. If you go forward with Alexander, keep your eyes open and your ears sharper. Notice everything. Remember everyone. It may be the only insurance policy you have. She rose to leave, pausing at the door. Whatever you decide, be certain it's what you want. Men like Alexander Volkov don't accept rejection gracefully, and they never forget what they consider betrayal. After she left, I sat motionless on the edge of my bed, her warnings circling in my mind like vultures. Outside, the black sedan remained, a visible reminder of Alexander's reach. My phone gleamed on the nightstand, awaiting my response to his invitation, or summons, as Mrs. Whitmore had called it. I had 3 hours before the car would arrive, or not arrive, depending on my decision. 3 hours to choose between safe obscurity and dangerous possibility. The hot water of the shower did nothing to clear my thoughts. As I dressed in my everyday clothes, jeans and a simple blouse, my eyes kept straying to the emerald dress, its fabric catching the morning light like a silent promise. My phone rang. Not a message this time, but an actual call, Alexander's number. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the accept button before finally pressing it. Hello? My voice sounded smaller than I intended. Emma. Just my name, but the way he said it sent shivers down my spine despite my reservations. You didn't respond to my messages. I was in the shower, I said, the mundane detail feeling strange in conversation with him. Ah. A pause, filled with unspoken implications. Did you sleep well? I thought of Mrs. Whitmore's revelations, of Marco Ricci in the hospital, of the men watching my apartment. Not really. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had cooled slightly. You've heard about Marco's unfortunate accident. It wasn't a question. I gripped the phone tighter. Was it an accident? Of course, he replied smoothly. A mugging gone wrong. The riverside path can be dangerous at night. Is that why you had to leave so suddenly? To arrange this accident? The silence that followed was heavy with tension. When Alexander finally spoke, his voice had dropped to that dangerously soft register I remembered from the gala. Be very careful with your accusations, Emma. Or what? I challenged, anger temporarily overwhelming caution. Will I have an accident too? Don't be ridiculous. The ice in his tone could have frozen the sun. I would never harm you, but there are realities to my world that you need to accept if we're to continue. If we're to continue, I repeated slowly. So I do have a choice. Alexander sighed, the sound surprisingly human coming from him. Everyone has choices, Emma, but choices have consequences. Is that a threat? No, he said, his voice softening again. It's simply truth. I want you in my life. I think you want to be there, but my world comes with certain complications. Like men watching my apartment? Did you order that? Or is it another complication I'm supposed to accept? Another pause. I see Mrs. Whitmore has been filling your head with concerns. The fact that he knew about her visit, so recent that the men in the car couldn't possibly have reported it yet, sent a chill through me. Are you having my apartment bugged too? No, he said, sounding genuinely surprised at the suggestion. But Margaret Whitmore visiting you the morning after our dinner is hardly coincidental. She has her own history with my family. She told me, I said, about your father, about what he did to her. Alexander was quiet for so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. My father, he finally said, each word precisely measured, was a brutal man in many ways. I am not him, Emma. Then call off your watchdogs. Let me decide on my own whether to see you again. The security detail is for your protection, he countered. Marco Ricci has associates who might blame you for his current condition, given your connection to me. A connection that consists of 2 evenings in your company, I pointed out. Hardly the great romance of the century. Not yet, he agreed, something warmer entering his voice. But I felt it from the first moment I saw you, Emma. There's something between us, something rare. Tell me you don't feel it too. The worst part was that I did feel it. That inexplicable pull. That sense of recognition that transcended our different worlds. Despite everything, I wanted to see him again, wanted to explore whatever this connection was. The car will come at noon, he said into my silence. The choice to enter it is yours, but know this. His voice dropped lower. If you walk away now, I won't pursue you. You'll be free of me and my world entirely. But it must be now, before we go any further. The offer surprised me, a clean break, a return to my ordinary life. It should have been exactly what I wanted after Mrs. Whitmore's warnings. After learning about Marco's accident, I need to think, I said finally. Of course, he replied, his tone neutral once more. Until noon then, perhaps. The call ended, leaving me in silence broken only by the distant sounds of traffic and my own uneven breathing. I moved to the window, looking down at the black sedan still parked at the curb. The men inside were just doing their jobs, following orders, protecting me, if Alexander was to be believed. I thought of my shift at Rosie's later that afternoon, of the endless cycle of coffee refills and greasy plates, of tips that barely covered groceries. I thought of my parents, gone too soon, leaving me to navigate adulthood alone. I thought of the community college degree I'd had to abandon, of dreams deferred and eventually discarded. Then I thought of Alexander, his intensity, his intelligence, the unexpected depth behind his controlled exterior, the way he looked at me as though I were precious and mysterious rather than ordinary and struggling. The feeling of his hand at the small of my back, his lips against mine. At 11:30, I reached for the emerald dress. The black Bentley arrived precisely at noon, Victor emerging to open the rear door with his usual stoic efficiency. I approached slowly, wearing the dress Alexander had sent, my own worn jacket over it against the autumn chill, a small bag containing a change of clothes slung over my shoulder. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter," Victor greeted me, his expression giving nothing away. "The men watching my building," I said without preamble. "Are they coming too, or staying to monitor my empty apartment?" Victor's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "They have been reassigned, Mr. Volkov called them off an hour ago." The small concession shouldn't have warmed me as it did, Alexander responding to my wishes, removing the surveillance I'd objected to. I slid into the back seat, half expecting to find him waiting. Once again, the car was empty. This time our destination wasn't Alexander's riverside mansion, but a private dining room in Luciano's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. The maitre d' greeted me by name as Victor escorted me inside, leading us through the main dining area, where heads turned to watch our progress, and into a secluded room with a single table set for two beside a window overlooking a small courtyard garden. Alexander rose as I entered, his eyes moving over me with undisguised appreciation. He wore a charcoal suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, a crisp white shirt open at the collar. No tie, no bodyguards visible within the room, an attempt at normalcy that was belied by the closed door and Victor's position just outside it. "You came," he said simply, moving around the table to pull out my chair. "I came," I agreed, allowing him to seat me. "But I have conditions." Something like amusement flickered in his eyes as he returned to his own seat. "I'm listening." "No more surveillance without my knowledge or consent," I began, meeting his gaze steadily. "No more surprise gifts left at my door. No more assumptions about my availability." I took a breath. "And complete honesty about what happened to Marco Ricci." Alexander sipped from a glass of water, studying me over the rim. "The first three conditions are reasonable," he said after a moment. "As for Marco, he was attacked by unknown assailants while walking alone at night in an area known for muggings. That's the official story, and it's the one you should maintain if asked." "And the unofficial story?" His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "Are you wearing a wire, Emma?" The question shocked me. "What? No, of course not." "Then don't ask questions whose answers could put both of us at risk." He set down his glass with deliberate precision. "There are aspects of my business that must remain separate from our personal relationship, for your protection as much as mine. So I'm supposed to just ignore the fact that a man who warned me about you ended up nearly dead the same night?" "Yes," he said simply. "That is exactly what I expect you to do." A server entered with a bottle of wine, temporarily halting our conversation. Alexander tasted and approved it with the ease of long practice, waited for our glasses to be filled and the server to depart, then leaned forward slightly. "Emma," he said, his voice gentler, "I understand your concerns. Margaret Whitmore's experience with my father has colored her view of me, understandably so. But I am offering you something different, a relationship based on mutual respect and honesty, within certain necessary boundaries." "What kind of relationship?" I asked, the question that had been hovering between us since the gala. "What exactly do you want from me?" Alexander's eyes held mine. "Everything," he said simply. "Your time, your trust, your body, your heart. I want to share my life with you, to give you everything you've ever wanted or needed." The intensity of his declaration should have frightened me. Instead, It sent heat coursing through my veins, a mixture of desire and something deeper, more dangerous. "You barely know me," I pointed out, trying to maintain some perspective. "I know enough," he countered. "I know you're intelligent, resilient, and unimpressed by wealth or status. I know you've been alone too long, fighting your own battles. I know you feel this connection between us just as strongly as I do." His hand moved across the table to cover mine. "The rest, we can discover together." The server returned with our first course, forcing Alexander to withdraw his hand. The meal progressed with conversation that carefully skirted our earlier tension. He asked about my interests, told me stories about his university days in London, made me laugh with surprisingly sharp observations about the city's social elite. By dessert, the wine and his undivided attention had worked their magic, relaxing me despite my lingering reservations. When he suggested we walk in the restaurant's private garden, I agreed readily, wanting to extend our time together. The autumn air held a crispness that complemented the golden late-afternoon sunlight filtering through turning leaves. Alexander guided me along a stone path that wound between carefully tended flower beds and ornamental trees, his hand at the small of my back in that now familiar possessive touch. "I've been thinking about your conditions," he said, as we paused beside a small fountain. "And I have a counter-proposal." I turned to face him, conscious of his height, his proximity, the subtle cologne that I was beginning to associate with safety despite all logic to the contrary. "I'm listening." "Move in with me," he said, the directness of the suggestion taking my breath away. "Not as a possession or a trophy, but as my partner. Share my home, my life." His eyes held mine, serious and intent. "No surveillance necessary if you're by my side. No questions about my business that put either of us at risk. Just us, building something together." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. I can't just... "Why not?" he challenged gently. "What's holding you to that apartment, to that diner job? What would you be giving up that couldn't be replaced with something better?" The answer, of course, was independence, the freedom to make my own choices, to fail or succeed on my own terms. Yet even as that thought formed, I questioned it. What freedom did I really have, trapped in poverty, in a dead-end job, in a life that had narrowed to survival rather than living? "I need time," I said finally. "This is moving too fast," Alexander nodded, disappointment visible in his eyes but accepting my hesitation. "A compromise, then. Stay with me for a week, see what life could be like. At the end of that time, if you choose to return to your apartment, I'll respect that decision. No surveillance, no pressure. And my job? Call in sick," he suggested with a slight smile, "or quit. I suspect Rosie will survive without you for a week." The offer was tempting, a trial run of a life I could barely imagine, with an exit strategy if it proved too much. "When would this week start?" His smile widened, sensing my wavering resistance. "Now. Tonight." "I don't have clothes, toiletries, all easily acquired," he interrupted. "Or we can stop at your apartment for whatever you need." I thought of Mrs. Whitmore's warnings, of Marco in the hospital, of all the reasons I should walk away from Alexander Volkov and never look back. Then I thought of returning to my empty apartment, to the loneliness that had been my constant companion since my parents' death, to the grinding struggle of making ends meet. 1 week, I agreed finally. No commitments beyond that. Alexander's smile held triumph and genuine pleasure in equal measure. 1 week, he echoed, raising my hand to his lips. Though I suspect it will be enough to convince you. We returned to my apartment briefly to collect essentials, clothes, medications, the few mementos of my parents I couldn't bear to leave behind. Alexander waited in the living area while I packed, his presence filling my tiny space in a way that made it seem even smaller, more inadequate. As I zipped my overnight bag, I caught sight of Mrs. Whitmore's number on a notepad by my bed. Impulsively, I sent her a text. "I'm staying with A for a week, a trial period. I'll be careful. Thank you for your concern." Her reply came almost immediately. "Remember what I told you. Eyes open, ears sharp. Call if you need me. Anytime." The drive to Alexander's mansion felt different this time, less like entering forbidden territory, more like embarking on an adventure. Alexander held my hand throughout the journey, his thumb tracing patterns on my skin that sent shivers of anticipation up my arm. Staff greeted us upon arrival, efficiently whisking away my modest bag. Alexander led me through the house to a wing I hadn't seen the previous night, opening double doors to reveal a suite that took my breath away, a bedroom larger than my entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, a sitting area with a fireplace, and glimpses of a bathroom that appeared to be entirely marble. "Your rooms," he said, watching my reaction closely. "Connected to mine through that door." He indicated a door in the far wall, but with your own entrance as well. Privacy when you want it, company when you desire it. I moved to the windows, taking in the view as twilight settled over the river. "It's beautiful," I admitted, overwhelmed by the luxury that Alexander took for granted. He came to stand behind me, his hands settling on my shoulders. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "I've been thinking about our interrupted evening since the moment I had to send you home." I turned in his embrace, looking up into eyes that had darkened with desire. "No more interruptions?" "None," he promised, his hands sliding down to my waist. "I've cleared my schedule entirely. For the next week, my only priority is you." When he kissed me, it was with the same intensity as the previous night, but with a new edge of possession, of certainty that I was now, at least temporarily, his. I yielded to it, to him, allowing myself to be swept into the current of desire that had been building since our first meeting. His hands moved over the silk of the emerald dress, tracing the curves beneath with appreciative skill. "As stunning as you look in this," he murmured against my neck. "I've been imagining you without it since the moment you first wore it." I should have felt vulnerable, out of my depth in this world of wealth and power. Instead, as Alexander's fingers found the zipper at the back of my dress, I felt a surprising sense of strength, of choice. I was here because I wanted to be, stepping into his world with eyes wide open. "Show me," I whispered against his mouth, my hands already working at the buttons of his shirt. "Show me what it means to be yours." His eyes darkened at my words, something primal and possessive flashing in their depths. "Mine," he agreed, the single word holding both question and confirmation. As the dress slipped from my shoulders to pool at my feet, as Alexander gathered me into his arms to carry me toward the massive bed, I surrendered to the inevitability that had been set in motion the moment our eyes met across that glittering ballroom. For better or worse, for 1 week or longer, I had stepped fully into Alexander Volkov's world, into his life, his arms, his heart. And despite every warning, every rational objection, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Days blended into one another in Alexander's world. I woke each morning in his arms, sunlight filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows to bathe us in golden warmth. We shared breakfast on the terrace overlooking the river, spent afternoons exploring the city in ways I never could have afforded. Private museum tours, exclusive restaurants, boutiques where staff knew Alexander by name, and treated me with deference that was both thrilling and discomfiting. At night, we returned to his home, our home as he increasingly referred to it, where he introduced me to pleasures I had never known existed, both in and out of the bedroom. His passion was matched only by his attentiveness, his desire to learn every inch of my body, every facet of my mind. "What are you thinking?" he asked on our 5th night together, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my bare back as we lay tangled in his sheets. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, turning the world beyond into a watercolor blur. "That this doesn't feel real?" I admitted, my cheek pressed against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "Like I'm going to wake up back in my apartment, back in my old life." He shifted, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. "This is real, Emma, and it doesn't have to end." The unspoken question hung between us. My week with Alexander was nearly over, the deadline we had agreed upon approaching with inexorable certainty. Soon I would have to decide, return to independence and struggle, or embrace this new life of luxury and passion, and compromise. Because despite the bubble of bliss we had created, Reality intruded in small but unmistakable ways. The calls Alexander took in his study, door firmly closed. The men who came and went at odd hours, speaking in hushed tones that ceased when I entered a room. The way staff and associates watched me with barely disguised curiosity, as though trying to determine what made me special enough to capture their boss's undivided attention. And through it all, Mrs. Whitmore's warnings echoed in my mind. Information is protection. Keep your eyes open, your ears sharper. So I watched. I listened. I noticed which associates made Alexander tense, which names caused his expression to shudder. I cataloged the patterns of his business, the shipments discussed in careful euphemisms, the territories mentioned in passing, the hierarchies evident in who waited and who was admitted immediately to his presence. I learned that Victor had served with Alexander's father in some unnamed capacity before emigrating to America, that Dmitri, the business associate from the gala, controlled the dockworkers' union through a complex system of bribes and favors, that a woman named Irina managed the legitimate side of Volkov Enterprises with terrifying efficiency and unwavering loyalty. Most importantly, I learned about Natalia, the name Marco had thrown at me like a weapon on the balcony, not from Alexander, who deflected my careful questions, but from a photograph I discovered in a desk drawer while searching for a pen. Alexander, with his arm around a stunning blonde, her smile brittle, her eyes haunted. Mr. Volkov's former fiancée, Victor had explained when I casually showed him the photo, his expression giving nothing away. Before my time with him. What happened to her? I had asked, keeping my tone light, merely curious. Victor's eyes had met mine, something like warning in their depths. She decided the life was not for her. She relocated. To Perth, I believe. The way he emphasized the destination felt deliberate, information offered as both explanation and caution. Perth. As far from here as one could possibly get without leaving Earth entirely. These thoughts swirled through my mind as Alexander's fingers continued their gentle exploration of my skin, his eyes studying my face with that intensity that still made my heart race. "You're thinking too hard again," he murmured, pressing his lips to my forehead. "What's troubling you?" "Marco Ricci," I said, the name slipping out before I could reconsider. "Has there been any update on his condition?" Alexander's body tensed subtly beneath mine, though his expression remained neutral. "He's recovering. The doctors expect a full recovery, physically at least." "Physically?" A slight shrug. Some memory loss around the incident. Not uncommon with head trauma. His fingers resumed their path along my spine. Why the sudden interest in Marco? I chose my words carefully. I was thinking about the night we met. How he confronted you at the gala. Ancient history, Alexander dismissed. Our families have been rivals for generations. His father and mine were at odds on many issues, like your father and Mrs. Whitmore. I suggested, testing boundaries. Something darkened in his eyes. Not quite the same situation. My father had genuine feelings for Margaret, in his way. The Riccis have always been business competitors, nothing more. I propped myself up on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light. What happened between them? Between your families? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, one hand coming up to brush hair from my face with unexpected tenderness. "You won't let this go, will you?" he asked, resignation rather than anger in his voice. "I want to understand your world," I said truthfully. "All of it, not just the parts you choose to show me." Another silence. Longer this time. I waited, patient, sensing he was weighing how much to reveal. "The Volkovs and Riccis have controlled different aspects of this city's underground economy for decades," he finally began, his voice measured. "My father handled imports, exports, protection. Antonio Ricci specialized in gambling, prostitution, local drugs. An uneasy balance existed. Not peace exactly, but a mutual understanding of boundaries." He shifted, sitting up against the headboard, drawing me against his side as though needing the physical connection to continue. "When I took over after my father's death, I began consolidating operations, modernizing. Antonio was old school, resistant to change. His son Marco saw opportunity in the transition. Thought I would be weaker than my father, easier to challenge. Was he right? I asked, feeling the slight tensing of Alexander's muscles at the question. No, he said simply, he wasn't. The implications hung unspoken between us. I thought of Marco in the hospital, of the accident that had so conveniently removed him as a threat, at least temporarily. And Natalia? I asked, the name dropping into the silence like a stone into still water. How does she fit into all this? Alexander went completely still beside me. Who told you about Natalia? Marco mentioned her at the gala, I reminded him. And I saw a photograph in your desk drawer. His jaw tightened. Going through my things, Emma? Looking for a pen, I countered, holding his gaze steadily. The photograph was just there. Victor said she was your former fiancé. Alexander was silent for so long I wondered if he would answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had a flatness I hadn't heard before. Natalia was Antonio Ricci's niece. Our engagement was meant to be a peace offering, a joining of families. His fingers had stilled on my skin. It was not a love match, at least not on my side. She had certain expectations about her role, about how much access she would have to family business. And when she didn't get that access? His eyes met mine, something cold and distant in them that made me shiver despite the warmth of the room. She found other ways to acquire information. Information she then shared with her uncle and cousin. The pieces clicked together in my mind with sickening clarity. She betrayed you. Yes. The single word held volumes of pain and fury. Pillow talk can be a powerful intelligence-gathering tool. I thought of Mrs. Whitmore's advice. Information is protection, and wondered suddenly if I had been playing a more dangerous game than I realized in my careful observations of Alexander's world. What happened to her? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Nothing happened to her, Alexander said, his voice controlled once more. When I discovered her betrayal, I ended our engagement and suggested she might be happier elsewhere. She chose Perth. A generous settlement ensured her comfort and her silence. Relief washed through me, though questions lingered. Had Natalia truly left voluntarily? Or had exile been the only alternative to a fate like Marco's? And what did it say about me that I was relieved, rather than horrified by the possibility? I would never betray you, I said softly, the words emerging unbidden. Alexander's expression softened, his hand coming up to cup my cheek. I know, he said, with a certainty that both warmed and unsettled me. You're not Natalia. You don't want my money or my power. You want me. He kissed me then, a kiss that deepened quickly into something more urgent, more consuming. I yielded to it, to him, pushing aside unanswered questions and lingering doubts in favor of the immediate, undeniable connection between us. Later, as Alexander slept beside me, I stared at the rain-streaked windows and confronted the decision looming before me. 2 days remained of our agreed-upon week. 2 days until I had to choose, return to my old life, or embrace this new one, with all its complications and compromises. The answer came to me in the gray light of dawn, as Alexander's arm tightened around me in his sleep, his body instinctively seeking mine. For better or worse, I had already chosen. Perhaps I had chosen the moment I accepted his dance at the gala, or when I entered his car for dinner, or when I agreed to this trial week. I belonged with Alexander now, to him in some ways, but more importantly to myself in his world. The Emma Carter who had existed before, struggling, invisible, alone, seemed like a half-formed version of the woman I was becoming at his side. When he woke, I was watching him, my decision evident in my eyes before I spoke the words. Ask me again, I said quietly. He blinked sleep away, understanding dawning as he took in my expression. Move in with me, he said, no hesitation in his voice. Be my partner, my equal, my love. Yes, I replied simply. His kiss was jubilant, possessive, tender all at once. When he finally pulled away, his eyes held a warmth I was still getting used to seeing directed at me. I'll have your things moved from your apartment today, he said, already making plans, claiming my life as his own. And we should celebrate tonight. Dinner at Lumen? Or perhaps... Wait, I interrupted gently. Before we get caught up in planning, there's something I need to say. Alexander stilled, wariness replacing the joy in his eyes. You're having second thoughts already? No, I assured him, taking his hand in mine. But I need you to understand something. I'm choosing you, choosing us, with my eyes wide open. I know who you are, what you do. I'm not asking you to change or to protect me from the truth. Relief flickered across his features, followed by something deeper, more complex. Emma, let me finish, I said, squeezing his hand. I know there will be parts of your business I can't be involved in. Lines you won't cross for me, just as there are lines I won't cross for you. I'm not asking for full transparency in everything, just honesty between us, here, in our private life. He studied me for a long moment, as though seeing me anew. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying I accept your world, Alexander. But I won't be Natalia, using your bed to gain information. And I won't be a possession, like Mrs. Whitmore was to your father. I met his gaze steadily. I'll be your partner in every sense that matters, but I'll also be myself, with my own boundaries, my own principles. Something shifted in his expression, respect mingling with the desire that was always present when he looked at me. And if those principles come into conflict with my world, then we'll figure it out together, I said simply. That's what partners do. He was quiet for a moment, considering my words with the careful deliberation he brought to all important decisions. Finally, he nodded, his hand tightening around mine. Partners, he agreed, the word sounding like both promise and challenge. The celebration that night was intimate rather than extravagant. Dinner on the terrace despite the autumn chill. A fire blazing in the outdoor hearth. Just the two of us with the city lights spread below like scattered stars. Alexander had arranged for my few belongings to be moved from my apartment. My keys turned into my landlord. My employment at Rosie's Diner, formally terminated with a generous bonus that had made Rosie's eyes widen with shock. To new beginnings, Alexander said, raising his glass to mine as we sat beside the fire, wrapped in soft throes against the evening air. And clear eyes, I added, thinking of Mrs. Whitmore's warnings, which had proved both accurate and incomplete. Yes, there was danger in Alexander's world, compromises required, hard truths to face. But there was also this, connection, passion, possibility. 3 months later, the transformation of my life was complete in ways I could never have imagined that first night at the charity gala. I had found my place in Alexander's world, not as his possession or his weakness, but as his strength, his confidant, his conscience when needed. I maintained certain boundaries. I refused security details unless genuinely necessary, insisted on keeping my friendship with Mrs. Whitmore despite her history with his father, and established a small foundation, using part of the allowance Alexander had set up for me, helping women escape abusive relationships and build independent lives. Alexander, to his credit, respected these choices. He negotiated rather than demanded, compromised where it mattered, and gradually allowed me glimpses into the aspects of his business he had initially kept separate. Not because I asked, but because he trusted me, a trust I guarded as fiercely as he protected me. Marco Ricci recovered from his accident, eventually returning to his family's business with a newfound respect for boundaries. The tension between the families eased, not into friendship, but into a more stable coexistence, facilitated in part by my neutral presence at Alexander's side. Mrs. Whitmore, initially skeptical of my decision, gradually came to accept that my relationship with Alexander was fundamentally different from hers with his father. He looks at you differently, she admitted during one of our weekly teas. Mikhail looked at me as a possession. Alexander looks at you as if you're essential to him. The truth of her observation struck me with particular force one evening, 6 months after I had moved into Alexander's home. We were hosting a charity event, my first as official hostess of the Volkov estate, when I overheard a conversation not meant for my ears. She's changed you, Dmitri said to Alexander in a quiet moment, the two men standing near the study door as I approached from the hallway. Softened your edges. Not softened, Alexander corrected, his voice carrying the quiet authority I had come to know so well. Focused. Everything I do now has clearer purpose. Because of her? Doubt colored Dimitri's tone. A waitress you met at a gala? I still don't understand what makes her different from all the others. There was a pause, during which I should have announced my presence but found myself frozen, waiting for Alexander's answer. The others wanted what I could give them, he said finally. Money, status, protection. Emma wants me, just me. And she sees me, not the position, not the power, not the legacy. She makes choices with her eyes wide open, knowing exactly who and what I am. And that's enough? Dmitri pressed. This domestic arrangement, this partnership? Alexander's laugh held genuine amusement. More than enough. It's everything. I stepped back quietly, not wanting to embarrass either man by revealing my eavesdropping. But Alexander's words stayed with me throughout the evening, warming me more than the champagne or the admiring glances of guests who had once looked through me as though I were invisible. Later that night, after the last guest had departed and we had retreated to the privacy of our rooms, Alexander watched me remove the diamond earrings he had given me for the occasion, simple but exquisite, like most of his gifts these days, chosen with increasing understanding of my tastes. Happy? He asked, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror as I sat at the vanity. I turned to face him fully, considering the question with the honesty that had become the foundation of our relationship. Was I happy? The life we had built together bore little resemblance to any future I could have imagined for myself before that fateful gala. It came with complications I was still learning to navigate, compromises I sometimes struggled to reconcile with my principles. Yet it also brought passion, purpose, partnership with a man whose complexities matched my own, a man who had offered me the world, but valued me most for seeing beyond its glittering surface to the person beneath. Yes, I said simply, rising to cross the room to him. I'm happy. His arms encircled me, drawing me against the solid warmth of his chest. Even with all the complications? He asked, a rare vulnerability in his voice. I reached up to trace the strong line of his jaw, thinking of how far we had come from that first dance, that first command. Even with all the complications, I confirmed, because they're our complications, and we face them together. Alexander's smile held all the intensity, all the possession, all the dangerous allure that had first drawn me to him, but now it held something else too. A warmth, a tenderness, a partnership forged in clear-eyed choice rather than blind passion. Dance with me, he murmured, taking my hand in his. It wasn't a command this time, but an invitation, and as we moved together in the quiet of our room, no music but the rhythm of our synchronized heartbeats, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice that night at the gala, and every night since. In Alexander's arms, in his world, in his heart, I had found not a cage but a key, unlocking parts of myself I never knew existed, revealing strengths I never knew I possessed. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever complications our unusual union might face, we would meet them as we had begun, with eyes wide open, hearts fully engaged, and a dance that continued, step by careful step, into our shared future,